So the first round of lightning talks that we're going to do here is engagement. So if you see your name on this slide, could you please come and join me up on the stage? So that's Laura and Samin and Noor and Roberta, please. Great. So, and while they're joining us, again, just as a reminder, I think Greg went over these themes earlier today. But with engagement, we're really, again, talking about how do we bring more people and organizations into open science, extend the reach and impact of open science. And so a lot of the projects that we're going to hear from today are really all about that. How do we get people engaged? How do we reach out to communities? How do we get communities involved in open science? And with that, I will stop talking and hand it over, first of all, to Laura Trouille, who's the VP of Science Engagement and Visualization at the Adler Planetarium in Chicago, and also PI for Zooniverse. And I'm going to try to do some navigation here because I believe we have. And I'm trying to click on your slides. All right. Musical chairs.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to the organizers and to the robust discussion this morning. Zooniverse is the world's largest platform for people-powered research in the world, with almost 3 million registered volunteers. It was started back in 2007, a partnership between the Adler Planetarium and Oxford with a single project, Galaxy Zoo. And then almost 2 decades later, we've launched over 450 different projects, from tagging penguins to transcribing historic documents, marking the structure of cells for cancer research, and discovering planets around distant stars. Each project is led by a different research team who need to unlock their data in some way. In 2015, we launched the Project Builder platform. This enables anybody to build their own Zooniverse project for free. And it really accelerated the expansion of the Zooniverse. So we went from us custom building 3 projects a year to research teams building their own and launching through our platform over 40 projects every year. With over 1.4 million classifications each week, it's the scale and speed of data analysis achievable has really transformed opportunities for the research landscape. So Zooniverse is just one of over 400 citizen science projects or platforms in the US alone. Citizen science values and practices directly align with open science values and practices. So in this context, I thought it'd be an important question to ask is, what's the role of citizen science in open science policies and practices? Or you could use the phrasing of, how can open science use citizen science to your advantage to reach the goals that you have? So for example, the European Open Science Practices document, the 5th bullet out of 5 is promoting public engagement in research and innovation, bolstering citizen science, and enhancing public trust in science. So there's a major societal issue, we're all aware, of public distrust in science. So open science is a critical lever for this, and citizen science sits at an important intersection between the research and the public, meaningfully engaging the public directly in real research, helping to lift the veil on the practice and processes of science, and creating space for dialogue between professional scientists and the public. So as a specific example, within the public, there's understandable distrust and misconceptions on how machine learning or ML works, and fear of its dangers. And so half of Zooniverse projects use machine learning in some way. They provide a safe sandbox to grow understanding with the public participants. To this end, Zooniverse is part of a new AI institute that's going to explore, among other things, AI literacy and public trust through citizen science in this realm. In citizen science, the conversations stem from the ground up, from concerns that citizen science themselves are raising. And so it provides a space to include the public in discussions and decision-making around ethical ML practices. So I'd be happy to chat about that more if people are interested. And related to ethical ML, I'm very interested in hearing what licenses people are using that align with open science values and downstream data protection. So that'd be great to talk about more as well. So the next note here is about connected cyber infrastructure. So a key ingredient for open science is easy to use tools for researchers, including as they move data and analysis efforts from one tool to another. So Zooniverse is open source. It's got a robust API. We have built-in flexibility in terms of data inputs and data ingest and outputs. So we're well set up for connected cyber infrastructure. For example, we're now connected with iNaturalist, which is a global data collection platform. And so researchers can just do a simple query and pull data from iNaturalist into their Zooniverse project subject set. As another example, Zooniverse data outputs are easily scripted to comply with GBIF biodiversity data archives and ingest protocols. So our challenge here is just knowing what the critical needs are in each of the disciplines, identifying the right partners for connected cyber infrastructure that will address these needs, and then identifying funding to support the development effort to create that connection. So I'm keen to explore this more with this group and find new cyber infrastructure partners within the community here. So a final note, good to say out loud amongst family and friends, is Zooniverse is not financially sustainable, as are many of these research infrastructure pieces. We're almost 2 decades in, and each year we reface the question of, will we keep the lights on? Significant fraction of our time goes into fundraising with grant success driven by the shiny and the new, but critical for us is just core infrastructure support, as it is for many of the cyber infrastructure platforms represented here. Supporting our software engineers and keeping the platform available to the hundreds of researchers who use the existing tools and the millions of citizen scientists who find meaning and joy in it, all while being compliant with state-of-the-art cybersecurity and accessibility, et cetera. So help cracking that nut is much welcomed in these discussions. Thanks.
All right. And so next up, we have Samin Vasir, who is with us as Professor of School of the Psychological Sciences at the University of Melbourne and co-director of MetaMelb Lab. I hope I said that correctly. So I'm going to navigate. Oh.
Great. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience in the field of psychology, which was hit with the replication crisis maybe harder than some other fields. And we had a particularly, I think, public period of self-reflection and trying to change and move towards open science. So I'm going to talk about some of my own opinions. They don't reflect the opinions of any groups or roles that I have officially. So one of the things we did in the wake of the replication crisis was we founded a society called the Society for the Improvement of Psychological Science. Brian Nosek and I co-founded it. And that experience has really, I think, taught us a lot of lessons about trying to do grassroots change in a particular discipline and the kind of resistance you meet in that experience. And for me, one of the big lessons and one of the first things we did as a society was writing our mission statement. And the lesson there was the importance of standing for something. And there's a tension there with like having a mission that stands for something that is different than other professional societies and that really tries to set up bylaws in a way that you are true to your fundamental values, and inclusivity and being a big tent and so on. And so early in the days of SIPS, we had a lot of challenges with like, where do we draw the line between we have to stand for something, we are here to improve, make changes and so on, but bringing in our critics and making sure we listen to a lot of different voices and so on. And that keeps playing out. So SIPS is now in its 9th year, I think. I'm no longer affiliated with it in any way, but I see the decisions that they have to make and the criticisms and so on. And one of them has to do around the location of the conference. So for a while, it was often in North America or Western Europe, and then it started moving around. So this year it was in Nairobi, next year it's in Budapest, and there's plans in the coming years to do it in Asia. And there's a lot of new problems coming up when you start moving your conference around that way, and people will criticize, so there's advantages from visa accessibility and things like that. And then there's challenges, for example, LGBTQIA, welcomingness and comfort and safety and so on. Of course, that exists within North America and Western Europe as well. So those are not concerns that are unique to one place in the world. But it's interesting, like thinking through, how does this fit with our fundamental goals and missions? How do we respond to our critics? How do we balance the many different values that drive our decision making? I think that's something that that is really important to grapple with. And I think for me, the really interesting thing was balancing being open to criticism and listening to critics while still standing for something and being true to one's mission. I think that was a really interesting challenge. Another thing I've learned, not just from SIPS, but from being part of kind of this reform movement in psychology more generally, is the trade-off between moving incrementally and making sure we bring people along, making sure there's infrastructure and equity and access there before we change rules, policies, requirements, and so on. But I also saw the downside of going too slow. And so, for example, in my role as a journal editor, we started implementing policies where transparency was optional in the beginning. So people could choose whether or not to share their data, whether or not to pre-register and disclose what was planned ahead of time and what wasn't. And as a journal editor, that optional policy was really, really difficult. And it created what I saw as a hidden curriculum, where some people were opting into this kind of transparency, and then we could scrutinize their work and we could say, oh no, you said that you planned this, but actually you didn't plan it. And other people were saying, we're not going to show you our pre-registration or pre-analysis plan. We don't have one. Just take our word for it. All of this was planned. And as a journal editor or a reviewer, how do you compare those two papers? So in the first case, the person's holding themselves accountable, giving you the ammunition to point out what's wrong with their work, and you should hold them accountable. You should say, no, you misrepresented things. In the second case, your options are either to say, no, I don't trust you, you have to show me, or to say, I trust you, okay, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. And when there's that tension, the people who get the benefit of the doubt are different than the people who don't get the benefit of the doubt. And so what I realized in my role as a journal editor was actually we need a period of things being optional and opt-in and having rewards like badges and so on, but we need to move through that period as fast as we can and get to a point where it's reasonable to require a certain minimum level of transparency from everybody, because that actually levels the playing field. Another lesson was that we need to work together between the people who are trying to change things from the inside and people who are kind of pushing and trying to just kind of burn down the system and rebuild it. And I think those people, even though they're very different approaches, I think they're complementary approaches, and we really need to work together and be allies. Interestingly, there are a lot of allies outside of the field entirely, like journalists, funders, people in other disciplines were really, really crucial to getting the reform movement in psychology going. And it's funny now for us to be in a position to be allies to other disciplines, and even physics, as much more progressive as they are than psychology on many open science things. I've now been invited to talk to 2 different physics meetings about, is there a replication crisis in condensed matter physics, which was shocking to me, but great that we're talking across disciplines. And then the last thing I'll say is that transparency was actually the easy part of the reform movement in psychology, as hard as it was. What we're realizing now is that transparency is for the purpose of detecting errors and correcting them. And that's actually a harder pill to swallow for people than even showing their work. You might have heard of a lawsuit that happened in our field where a Harvard professor, there was an investigation, and she was put on administrative leave, and 4 of her papers were retracted. And she then turned around and sued not just Harvard, but the 3 whistleblowers who alerted Harvard. And luckily that lawsuit was dismissed. So we're making progress in setting the norm that transparency exists for a reason, which is correcting the record. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, we're going through this quickly. That's the spirit of lightning. So we have 2 speakers that I think will be speaking together. So Noor Johnson is a research scientist at the National Snow and Ice Data Center at University of Colorado Boulder, leads the Exchange for Local Observations and Knowledge of the Arctic, which is ALOCA. And then Roberta Turek-Glenn, I hope I said that correctly. Apologies if I didn't. Is coordinator and community liaison for the Arctic Observatory and Knowledge Hub at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And I'm going to try to navigate to your slides. All yours.
Good morning. ALOCA got its start in 2007, and we've been sustained through multiple rounds of funding from the National Science Foundation for more than 17 years. We work with a network of community partners from across the Arctic, and our partners are documenting the local impacts of accelerated environmental change in a region that is warming at least 2 times faster than the rest of the Earth. Many of them are also involved in recording and documenting the knowledge of elders to sustain Indigenous knowledge systems and Indigenous languages. ALOCA supports open science in a number of ways. First, by increasing visibility of place-based knowledge systems that have been traditionally underrepresented in Western science and governance systems, or to use the view from the Arctic Southern science and governance systems, yet are foundational to understanding and responding to environmental change. We collaboratively develop customized software tools that help our partners steward and share their knowledge based on their goals, which can be oriented toward local community use or towards sharing more broadly. We also strive to support interoperability of these tools and systems, and we draw on and contribute to open source repositories. We also uphold Indigenous data sovereignty by prioritizing ethical approaches to data collection and sharing, which includes limiting access to sensitive data. We strive to follow and raise awareness of Indigenous governance protocols that are essential to ethical research. An important part of our work is convening our network for shared learning opportunities, and we do that by convening network-wide gatherings. So you can see us couples, that was last summer in Fairbanks having a meeting, but we also develop and deliver customized trainings to our partners. And this is really critical to our success in sustaining long-term partnerships, but it also takes a lot of time and it can be hard to sustain. So one area that we're interested in learning from others in this space is how to better deliver trainings that really meet people where they're at, and also to do better in improving our feedback system so that we can improve on our tools and really listen and learn from community users of our tools. We're also working on our sustainability model, as I believe many programs are, and we're seeking ways in particular to more equitably organize our activities to support our community partners. So we're a university-based network. We've used and benefited from NSF funding, but it's really hard within a university system to get funding and resources equitably across the network. So maybe others in the room have models that have worked for them, and we'd love to learn and to talk more about that. So now I'm going to hand it over to Roberta.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Roberta Turok Glenbarade. I'm from Utqiagvik, Alaska. I'm Inupiaq, Indigenous to the Arctic. I work with the Alaska Arctic Observatory and Knowledge Hub, or AOK, as we like to lovingly call it. AOK is one of the partner organizations in the ILOCA network. Oh, yeah. There we go. AOK is one of the partner organizations in the ILOCA network. We're a community-based observing program which supports long-term and holistic environmental monitoring by Inupiaq observers in coastal Arctic Alaska. So we have a network of local observers that are living in community, traditional lives based on the land and sea, who are sending in their observations. So what's going on the land? What's going on the ocean? Is it normal? Is it, oh shoot, okay. So I got to wrap up here. So we focus on Nunakit Savakatigivlugich, or working with communities to provide a platform to share Indigenous knowledge, observations, and expertise in the context of a changing Arctic. An increasing emphasis of AOK is to build connections across regional scales with entities such as wildlife co-management organizations, tribal governments, and federal agencies, where local observations can be applied to equitably elevate Indigenous knowledge and perspectives in decision-making regarding Indigenous peoples. And a recent change in our work around open science, it includes updates to our AOK and ILOCA online database use agreement, so that use agreement that you check to get access and get into the database. We revised that use agreement to reflect the priorities and concerns of the AOK observers in 2022. Those changes included language that restricts users from using observations to infringe on subsistence hunting, fishing, or gathering rights. We also made changes to the academic citation to say observers of coastal Arctic Alaska, rather than listing each observer by name. They recognize that this body of knowledge that's housed in the ILOCA database, it's not just credited to them, but the observers who were part of the project before them, and others who may join in the future. So to continue our important work, we need federal agencies and funders to acknowledge research projects that center Indigenous knowledge, priorities, and observations as meritable science that directly benefits Indigenous communities as well as the greater research community in understanding and responding to climate change. Thank you.
Can't leave it on this one.
Okay, yeah.
We'll leave you with these nice.
Oh,
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, a bit of musical chairs here, but thank you all. And I know we never have enough time to hear about projects, so I'd encourage you all to find these folks and ask them more questions. But we do have a few minutes for questions right now, so I think there's a mic down by your feet there, and then a traveling mic over here. So do we have any questions for our engagement panelists?
You mentioned the change to the user agreement. How did that come to be? How did that come to fruition?
How did the change, or how did we decide, or?
Yeah, I mean, was it sort of who suggested it? How was it socialized? How was the ultimate language decided upon?
So I know that the use agreement was like, it had been the same since the database started, which I believe was 2006. And our team was growing. I just joined AOK as full-time staff. I started as a graduate student. And so it's like, hey, we should check in on this use agreement. Let's make sure we're all on the same page with what it says here. Is this okay? Is it not okay? What changes can we make? And we had a whole like 2-day meeting kind of around that in person. And that's what these photos are from actually, where Billy Adams is telling a really funny story and I'm smiling at him. That's where we discuss these topics.
Maybe I have a quick follow-up question. Just someone mentioned the CARE principles, I think really briefly. Has that come into discussions with your communities? What has been the kind of discussion around the CARE principles, the application of the CARE principles?
Yeah, well, we're really starting to learn more about the CARE principles through ALOCA. We've been able to help to contribute to those kinds of conversations around Indigenous data sovereignty. A really cool and unique thing about our work is that the observers that we work with, they want their knowledge, their observations, they want their voices out there. That's why they are working with us. And so we really work hard to share everything that they want us to share.
Hi, my name is Judith from Claxo in Argentina. We are working about these issues for more than 20 years, and this is very nice, very important, the impact of our work and how we share, and always the same problem. What about the evaluation? Why never, how can we measure this? Why never we measure this in our academic evaluation? Why there never have impact in the evaluation? How can you manage this in your career, in your academic career?
Yeah, that's a great question. It came up earlier too. And I would echo something that Knox said about how we are the incentive structure, the academics, we can make changes ourselves. And so one of the things we can do is we can not just do bottom up stuff, but those of us who are in positions to take on leadership roles and to become gatekeepers, it's not just about like creating alternatives on the side, but we can actually change the existing structures. So one of the reasons I wanted to become a journal editor was we're never going to get rid of journal prestige. We can change how much we weight journal prestige, but another thing we can do is try to make a journal's prestige actually linked to the quality of the work it publishes. So journals can be expected to have policies that make the work they publish evaluatable by others. So requiring open data, requiring more transparency. They can be transparent themselves by doing things like publishing peer review histories to show how rigorous their peer review process is, et cetera. We can hold those journals more accountable. We should also try to be working around them, but we are those journals. We are those journal editors, those reviewers. We can insist, if I'm going to review for you, then I want to be able to see the data. I want to be able to understand why the data can't be shared or things like that. So I think there's a lot we can do within the existing incentive structure, and blaming, oh, the incentives are making me do it, when you have a seat at the table, you can try to change the incentives, is not enough. Thank you.
This is a question for Zooniverse. When you have these incredibly successful projects that go across all of science, I think you mentioned that funding is a issue, right? And that came up in other people's discussion as well. You almost are so successful across all of science that it makes it very difficult to find where do you go for funding? You're not, oh, you do earth science. You're a square trying to fit into a round hole that some program officer has designed a program around. So what do you see as a potential solution? And there's many projects that fall into this within open science, where you have lots of people flocking to you, wanting to use this and could participate in it. And it's incredibly successful, but often that success is very hard to get funding for. And what do you see as like a potential option? Like you could ask people who are using it for, like what are the different mechanisms that you've talked about that you've thought are most promising?
Yeah, there are some lessons learned. So one is because each project, Zooniverse project, is led by a different research team, each research team in their disciplinary field is seeking NIH, National Institute for Health funding, or Institute for Museum and Library Services funding. And then we get a tiny little piece of their grant pie goes to Zooniverse for, usually it's the shiny and new, to build the new tool that they need that then further bloats the infrastructure. Sometimes in good ways, it's new features, functionality. Sometimes it's just because we need that funding to sustain our team. NASA actually has a lovely model where for the past 5 years, we've had core infrastructure support from NASA because it's recognized there's a 24 NASA researcher-led projects on the platform. And so NASA made this investment into Zooniverse. But that funding is hitting its end this year. The program officer changed, and we're really facing an unknown of whether that will renew. That would be a huge problem for Zooniverse's sustainability. The other is if you are in a position where your platform can be used by corporate volunteering in some way, we've now raised about $250,000 each year through corporate volunteering partnerships where the company has environmental sustainability as ERG goals, and then they support Zooniverse just to keep the lights on so their employees can volunteer in it. I'd be happy to share. It's pure cash. It's not the pro bono corporate support that never is particularly helpful. It's just pure philanthropic support. And I'm happy to share how we've been building that and our approach to kind of building that business revenue, which is an alternate to federal and private funds. But yeah,
And
thanks.
we'll just take one more question for this panel, if there is. No? Okay. Well, thank you to all our engagement panelists. All right, and we're gonna do just a little bit of a switch up here. And I'm gonna ask Karthik and Tony to join me here on the stage. So we're gonna go next to acceleration. And as it sounds, the idea is how could we work together to speed up the transition to an open by design research ecosystem? How can we promote kind of evidence-based cases for how open science correlates with things like research efficiency or inclusivity, public engagement? And then how do we identify better tools and technology that make open science demonstrably more efficient and actionable than the status quo? So how do we speed up what we all in this room would like to see? So I'm going to start with Karthik, who is a program officer in open science at the Navigation Fund. And I will do my best here to so much navigating. All right.
While this is done, I know some of you have been trying to access the public notes document and you couldn't make it. Probably try to do it with your different Gmail account or something like that. If you have problems, keep having problems, come to me and we'll try to solve it.
Okay, thanks for having me. For this talk, the core message that I want you to leave with is that there's never been a better time to build open science. You may have heard this at other times, but I think now is truly the time. And part of the reason why I feel this way is that we have made a lot of progress on open science over the last 2 decades. We've had tons of successes, but I have this feeling that the gap between the technologies that we use in open science and what we're actually using is wide, and it's growing wider and wider all the time. And if we as a community are always making small incremental changes because we're afraid of upsetting the status quo, then we're not going to make very much progress. And I think to have better progress in science, we need rigorous open science tools and practices. And we need to give researchers a lot more agency to work with a ton more data, with better computational tools that are currently available. And one way we could do this is, if you're not too worried about upsetting the academic status quo and start thinking about collaborating across these different sectors, you might find that there's a surprising amount of interest in open science in some very unusual places. So lately, I've been talking to a lot of people in industry and startups, and open science is really popular in those spaces. And overall, there seems to be an appetite for adopting disruptive open science practices. And if we're able to lean into this and start collaborating across these different institutions, we can make some real progress in open science. And it's not just startups and industry, but also other types of organizations that are emerging to address some of the more pressing scientific problems. So one example that I really like is called an FRO, a focused research organization. These organizations are time-bounded with a very clear mission to deliver high-value public goods, like well-curated data sets or tools and protocols. And it's not that they replace existing institutions, but they are necessary to solve certain types of scientific problems. And I think open science can form a nice bridge between these new organizations and more traditional organizations, across disciplines, across domains, and help us act with more agency. And to do that, we actually need a much better open science infrastructure than we have now. Like many of you, and thanks to the Zooniverse talk, I see ourselves in a universe where we're stuck between these two extremes. We have, on one end, unicorns, which are corporate funded projects that have a mission to prioritize profits over public goods. And at the other extreme, you have all these well-meaning grant funded projects, many of which never have a shot at ever becoming sustainable. And so what if we try to engineer something in the middle, organizations that are not unicorns or show ponies, but are actually gazelles, organizations that are small and well-intentioned, like FROs, they're very mission-driven. They're not trying to solve every single problem and build large pieces of infrastructure. Instead, they're trying to collaborate with other people that are working on complementary pieces. They are also organizations that have characteristics that I really appreciate. So one is they are not beholden to any particular technology for long periods of time. They're willing to be agile, they're willing to adapt, and they're willing to sort of stay ahead of the curve. Second is they're really well-intentioned about finding ways to become financially sustainable and not being too beholden to any particular type of model. So it could be a nonprofit with a revenue model, it could be a corporation with a social impact focus, it could be a partnership. There's many, many different ways to approach this. And I work at the Navigation Fund. We're a new funder funding open science. And our objective is to fund practical and sustainable open science. And in my execution, I'm trying really hard to balance innovation with sustainability. So I'd like to see new disruptive ideas come to life without being burdened with the responsibility of sustainability from day one. But at the same time, there are many successful projects doing really good work in the community that need to be resourced into a clear path to sustainability. So how do I balance that and make that happen? Very final message that I do want to leave you with is that there's lots of resources. It's not just us. We're brand new in the space. We've just started making funding, but there are many funders in this room that have been supporting open science for a really long time. But there are also new kinds of opportunities that are coming up, not just funding. So one example, I don't know if Jessica Polka is in this room. There she is. Astera has an entrepreneurship and residence program. There are other organizations that are offering accelerator programs. There's new ways to engage and build open science. I hope you take advantage of that. Thanks.
Super. Okay. And then our next speaker is Tony Ross, who has many titles, and I'm going to try to read just maybe one of them. So head of the Open and Reproducible Research Group at Graz University of Technology and No Center Research, right? So I will move over to your slide. You color coordinated.
Hi, everyone. So in my talk, I want to focus more on how we take stock of where we're going as a global community with open science in order to prioritize better for the future. I really enjoyed the panel this morning, and a few quotes stuck out to me. So the first was the idea that there are many different churches within open science, churches of reproducibility and churches of engagement. And this really sticks out to me, that a reminder that open science is a pluralism. It's nice to all get together and feel like a global community, although there are always questions of who's in the room and who's not. But open science is a bundle of different practices, which are very different challenges. How to increase data sharing in the various standards or infrastructures compared to code sharing even. These are different, very different challenges at different levels of progress, which is very different to making publications open or opening processes of engagement so that others beyond academic communities can get involved and even upstream. And that's different from, as well as being a bundle of practices, it's also a bundle of principles. So there was mention of the UNESCO recommendation, and that's got values like quality, integrity, collective benefit, equity, fairness, diversity, inclusiveness, and also principles, transparency, scrutiny, critique, reproducibility, equality, responsibility, and on and on and on. These are very different things, and we can't have everything at the same time. Maybe we have to prioritize certain things in certain circumstances. We prioritize getting ahead on certain practices, or we optimize for certain values. And certainly before the UNESCO recommendation, we weren't optimizing for equity. And so another couple of quotes were that the risks of open science are not the same for everybody, which is certainly true, and that there are lots and lots of potential unintended consequences which we run as we put open science into practice. And what this means is that it's really, really important that we take stock of where we're going as a global community. In terms of taking stock, though, we are too focused on checking uptake. Are we looking into, are we achieving what we want, which is researchers are publishing open access, that they are sharing data, that they are sharing code, that citizens are able to take part in citizen science processes, and far too little focus on what are the real world impacts which achieve those values and aims which we claim that we're aiming for. That just making publications open doesn't necessarily achieve greater levels of scientific understanding. For instance, we're focused way too much on physical access rather than cognitive access to that literature. So the Pathos project is an EC-funded project which is looking into the impacts of open science. And its aims is to quantify what are the pathways of open science across academia, society, and the economy, especially with specific focus on what do we know about causation there? What do we know about, you have more data sharing, okay, this is an output of the open science movement. What's the outcomes from that? And what are the real world impacts in terms of the communities which we envisioned reusing this data, reusing it. A lot was made 10 years ago of data as the new oil. Let's open up this new resource for industry. For instance, and there's very little evidence of that. So within the project, we have scoped that evidence. There are a couple of preprints, which I'll add to the notes, which show that the level of robust evidence is pretty low. It mostly comes very often from independent researchers, very often from those involved in their own initiatives, with potential for publication bias. A lot of positive results in that literature. We have lots of streetlight effects that we're measuring what's easy to measure. Lots on the open science, open access citation advantage, which would disappear in a world where we had full open access, for example. So the Pathos project, we are creating tools for looking deeper at causality, frameworks for measuring impact, for using cost-benefit analysis, and we have an indicator handbook. I'd invite you to look at the project and contact me if you have any questions. There we go.
All right, great. Any questions for Karthik or Tony? We do have circulating mics. Don't be shy. Question mark.
I'm Vince from Brazil. I didn't say that I am from a community network that is mainly Afro-descendants and indigenous communities, and we call the Mocambos Network, and we are, well, communities is millenary, so exist for a long time, but the network is around 20 years. And we'd like to know how we can be supported. So I'd like to know if there is some way to access, because we don't have a big foundation behind the big. We never want to be a big NGO. We'd like to stay in the same. We don't want to transform in another thing. We want to be the same thing, but to be recognized and supported. And so this is also one thing that we are working to. We called in Brazil, there is a universities based on one of the leg of the university is called university extension. That is the university should be connected to the society, but the same university is saying that is not working. So we are trying to also with the support and with the university and the students movements. We are trying to propose another way that we are calling community extension, not university extension. That is, the community should have the same tools and resources that at least the university and the academic field has. So if I am a community researcher, I should have the same support as an academic professor to carry on my research and my development. So we would like to share this proposal because it's not only a Brazilian one. We are connecting with our international network. So yeah, this is we have also, I brought some of our technologies. One of them, maybe you know, this is a drum. This is a very working right now technology to join people. This one is maybe some people here knows what is this. Do you know baobab tree? how do you call this? It's a baobab fruit. We call moana. We call mukua. That is also an African word. And we are developing a network of memories that is also mukuas, but is a new technology with a computer, with a local Wi-Fi network that synchronize even without internet. So data is getting back to our territories. So we are trying to move the focus to the territories, back to the territories, so we can create open science in the place where this science has meanings, as people, as an environment. So it can work.
Maybe I can generalize the question too. I think the question, if I understand correctly, is how do you kind of keep that spirit of your community, keep the goals of the community, but also, search for outside funding, become sustainable without losing those values in the process? Is that kind of the question for Tony?
And without changing our nature.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
One of you want to tackle that question?
Great. I'll take a quick stab at this. I don't have a great answer to your question, but I know of some organizations that are trying to act in clever ways where they can maintain their structure and identity and still sort of tap into an additional network of resources. I don't know of any models that have scaled, but I'm happy to talk more over a coffee break or something. But great question.
Yeah. Great.
Hi, I'm Julie Lowndes from OpenScapes, and it was great to hear both of your stories. I love the gazelle idea, and that's something I really identify with. And I'm curious how that can then be used to, as we think about impact and thinking about like breaking the systems that don't work. So for example, like when we have gazelles that are contributing to shared impact, how can we not then turn around and say, tell us, like claim your piece of this pie impact wise, and like where could we put that time and energy and effort if we could think differently on that front?
Okay, I'm not sure I have a great answer for this, but I think the whole point of becoming a gazelle is that you've sort of identified your core value proposition and you're focusing on that. And you're not trying to bite off too much of the pie because you feel like you have to do so much more to sort of demonstrate impact. I think trying to break away from the system where you have to have credit that is very easy to describe and very easy to attribute is what forces us into the current systems that we have and the current ruts that we find ourselves in. So I think if gazelles can demonstrate value to the cohort of the herd that they're part of, and the herd is having collective impact, to me, that value is sufficient as a funder to continue supporting that or finding additional resources for that to exist. Yeah, I just don't think optimizing too much for metrics that are measurable is a worthwhile endeavor. Yeah.
All right, maybe we can take one more question. David? Oh, sorry, Malvika. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Malvika Sharan. I'm representing the Turing Way and OLS. My question is for Karthik, but maybe Tony, you also have an answer for that. So a lot of open science funding, you've been open science practitioners yourself, so I feel like you bring a lot of that experience as a funder. There's a lot of funding that comes from private funders, and there's very little accountability the community can have to the private funders. Private funders can pull out money, they can stop program, communities can deal with it. So maybe it's a question for you. How do you build that accountability in a fairly new funding, which may not have the existing system to lean on and to build something new? At the same time, I've already seen you're demonstrating transparency in terms of how funding calls are being made or who are being invited. What kind of rubrics or criteria you would have, so we don't really become trend followers? Because right now conversation are, we should fund all the AI technology and we should all fund all the things that's going to be 10 years from now. And then at the same time, we talk about maintenance of existing technology. So you're taking on really huge task, I know, but I'm also very curious to understand how you would navigate that with the community.
This is a really great question. I might have to think a reasonable amount before we have a good conversation about this. I'll just briefly say that as a new funder, we're trying to be responsible with the community in how we launch a program, how we fit into the landscape of existing funders, being very thoughtful about what areas could we have impact without necessarily picking something that already has tons of resources where we might have incremental impact. I'm extremely mindful of the challenge of new funders going after shiny new things while existing things need to be maintained. And so I'm sort of trying to balance that out as well and see how can I enable existing scientific infrastructure to continue, but also make room for innovation. So we don't find ourselves in a situation where like a collection of banks that are too big to fail. We just don't ever let anything fail. And so we can never, ever do anything new. Yeah.
Damon?
If I can respond
sorry,
to that
Tony,
question as
yeah.
well. So I'm from Europe, so the philanthropic funders are largely a black box to me, but from my knowledge, they are largely black boxes anyway. And priorities are kind of set from the top based on the personal foibles or interests of particular individuals. I think that making programs and calls obviously more responsive is done through upstream engagement with the communities that you want to affect. And so increasing those kind of processes in funding decisions, I think would really, really help. And then in terms of the downstream, so some measure of assessment is necessary, right? I completely understand the kind of assessment culture and the kind of impacts of neoliberalism are really binding, but some sorts of assessment are necessary. We know we have, well, maybe we don't know, maybe we have quite vague ideas of where we want to be going, and better defining exactly what those longer term impacts are meant to be and ways that we could downstream measure those, even build, not necessarily measure, but assess, build those into project funding, for example, over longer time streams as well. Projects end, obviously, after 3 years or something, you give a final report and walk away, dust your hands, but maybe that shouldn't be the way. Maybe longer term assessment mechanisms across funding programs and working as communities to define, so to have collective expectations of what those could be in order that we make evidence comparable across funding programs.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to thank our acceleration speakers. And again, you can find them here as well if you have more questions. So thank you, Beth. All right. And our last set of speakers is going to be speaking on coordination. So Kathleen, Malcolm, Ting, and Hung, if you see yourself here, you can join me up on the stage. And this theme, of course, as it sounds, we're interested in promoting collaboration, identifying opportunities to make open science workflows more efficient for both humans and machines, efficiently share information about promising new activities, evidence-informed success stories, and other kind of key developments. So how do we coordinate across geographies, across organizations, across disciplines? So I am going to start out by introducing Kathleen Fitzpatrick, who is the Interim Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies at Michigan State University and also Project Director of Knowledge Commons. And let's get your slides. Right, all yours.
Thank you. So thank you, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me. I come to you from the humanities, so I bring
a little bit of diversity into our conversations about open science. But as we heard a bit about in this morning's open panel, from the perspective that I bring today, the openness of open science is not really just about ensuring access to the results of research or even opening up the processes of research, but also about building an open community of researchers and ensuring that the infrastructure on which that community relies is also open. So my project, Knowledge Commons, is working to facilitate all of those, forms of openness. The network was originally founded as Humanities Commons, and given that disciplinary origin, our community is at this point comparatively small but mighty. We support more than 50,000 researchers, instructors, students, and other interested members of the public who work across the disciplines and around the world. The Commons brings together a library-grade document and data repository with features including researcher profiles, group collaboration spaces, and WordPress-based website creation. More than anything, we're really committed to acting non-extractively, right? Use of the platform is and will remain free and open to anyone without regard for institutional affiliation or geographic location, primary language, or other exclusionary factors. We're sustained through grant support, though, and through contributions from funded projects, organizations, and institutions that choose to help support our platform and keep it free and open for everyone. And so the question that comes up for us a lot, and it's not at all unlike the question that we've heard from Laura in the first round of lightning talks and from Karthik in the second one, is how an open shared infrastructure project like ours can become truly sustainable. The platform is open to everyone, so it would be perfectly reasonable for a university CIO or library dean to ask us why they should bother paying for our services when they can just direct their communities to use our site for free. Now, our answer to this question has largely been that our sustaining members get a seat at the table in return for their investment, right? They get a voice in our governance processes and the ability to weigh in on our development roadmap. But a step beyond that, and the thing that we could really most use help with right now, would be transforming the platform into a genuinely open source development project, bringing together a community of project managers and developers and designers and more who want to work with us on ensuring that the platform develops in the ways that its community requires. And laying the groundwork for that transformation is a real challenge for a very lean team that is already facing an impossible to-do list. So the thing that I'm trying to get at here is that the challenges that we face in coordinating work in open science, those challenges often have less to do with the specifics of fields or research methods or even the technical affordances of the platforms that we use for that coordination than it does for the community building around the choices that we make, right? And ensuring that the research communities that we work with are inspired to do their work on open infrastructure, not just because it's open, but because they have a voice in its future and a commitment to helping it get where they want it to go. And I'm going to leave it there for right now. Thank you. Great, thank you so much. All right, our next speaker is Malcolm McLeod, who's professor of neurology and translational neurosciences and co-director of Edinburgh Neuroscience, and also founding member of the UK Reproducibility Network Supervisory Board. All right, our mouse is having, yes, our mouse is having a little bit of technical difficulties. Plus me. There we go.
Great, thanks. It's lovely to be here. You can tell I'm a neurologist because I'm the only one in the room, I think, wearing a tie. It's what I feel most comfortable in, so forgive me. So the UK Reproducibility Network was established in 2019, led really by Marcus Manafo with some input at the origins from Dorothy Bishop. But in the first gang of four that set it up was Marcus from Bristol, Chris Chambers from Cardiff. He's the one who thinks registered reports is the answer to every problem in research. It's the answer to almost every problem in research, but not quite every problem. Laura Fortunato, who is an evolutionary anthropologist from the University of Oxford, so almost into the humanities as a research domain, and myself as a kind of clinician come life sciences researcher. And the purpose in recognizing that there was this crisis of reproducibility was to try and put in place a system, a set of resources, a set of skills and expertise that would allow the United Kingdom to become a leading country in the world for having a reputation for doing reproducible research. The main reason for doing that isn't that we believe that the United Kingdom should be the only place in the world that does this, but because most of our funders were UK based, and so we needed to give them something to get from their money. We've got a three-legged stool in terms of our structures. There's our stakeholders, there's our institutions, and there's our local networks. And they fulfill very different functions. So our stakeholders, they're the ones that often come with the money, including the Wellcome, who are represented today, several journals. Some of the journals that Damien used to be associated with are stakeholders, not his current one. Maybe that might change. Institutions can join and say that they are members of the UK Reproducibility Network, and the price for them is they create an individual within their institution whose job it is to hold the institution's feet to the fire in terms of their performance around reproducible research. And then local network leads are our kind of terrorist wing. They're our junior, highly motivated, highly driven earlier career researchers who are desperate to change the world. And we seek to kind of harness their energy and their opinions and their really smart ideas for how things might change as part of UKRN, but also to bring them together across institutions so they can share best practices. And we think of reproducibility, I suppose, as being a three-legged stool. So what makes for reproducible research? Well, we think partly it's open research. Are your data, your code, your findings accessible so people can use it? Partly, I think it's about research culture, and that's an indivisible thing. A lot of what we heard earlier on about the barriers to open research stem directly from the research cultures in which we operate. Unless we address those, then we're not going to get very far. And thirdly, research integrity, by which I don't mean the integrity of researchers, but the scientific integrity, the plausibility, the credibility, the provenance of a given research funding. And so we try and work in all of those spaces with quite a lot of work on open research, actually, because that's where the external grant funding has come from, but with interests across all three. And over the time since then, we've gradually built and I think engendered the creation of reproducibility networks in other countries and in other regions. So there's an African reproducibility network. There are several throughout Europe. There's a Canadian reproducibility network. And without there being a blueprint and a script that these people have to run off, we try and help the early growing reproducibility networks find their feet and join our big gang and help them out. And so far it's working reasonably well. And just to touch on the issue of funding, I think there's a whole lot to unpack in funding. We've been fortunate so far with some people giving us a bit of money because they trusted us, little packets of little bits of money, which together add up to quite a bit. We've had some grant funding from friends, but grant funding nonetheless. But then we'll get to the stage where the seeking of further funding is going to become our sole purpose, because we need to keep the show on the road. And I think when an organization gets to that stage, it's either going to be hit or miss. So either someone is going to come along and say, guys, you do great work. Here's a recurrent grant of £200,000 a year forever, keep going, or they're not. And if they're not, I think you should probably stop. And you should let some other ginger group, groundswell group come and replace and renew and refresh. And that's a very difficult thing for organizations in this space to do, because we know that what we're doing is really important. But geez, I'm 60 next year. I'm no longer tomorrow's promise. And there's a time for people and for organizations to make space for the next generation. And if that happens, we should accept it and allow it to happen organically. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. So our next speaker is Ting Xu, who's director of the Center for Integrative Developmental Neuroscience at the Child Mind Institute and executive committee member of the Chinese Open Science Network. Right.
Hi, everyone. My colleague is supposed to be here, but it's so expensive for him to travel here.
as we mentioned, the visa issue. So I'm Ting Xu from Chinese Open Science Network. So Chinese Open Science Network, or COSN, is a grassroots network that's to promote open science and rigors and reproducibility in Chinese-speaking community. So over the years, we just started as a small group, but over the years, we organized various open science activity, as shown here, Open Transfer, that we translate open science resource into Chinese, and to bring all the people enjoy it. And Open Minds, a journal club where we discuss research papers and ideas. Open Talks, we invite guest speakers to speak about their scientific papers and frontiers of the progress. And Open Tutorial focus on training basically the statistics and programming. And Open Plus, we discuss basically research life and the career topics, and as well as the hackathon that we have organized, 3 hackathons so far. So far we have grown and have already 30,000 subscribers in this community. As shown on the left, it is, as we know, the open science movement has been growing rapidly in the past, but it is still underrepresented in the developing country, including China. So that's why I'm here. And we have learned a lot of lessons. Here's some tips that I'd like to share for building a local open science networks. First of all, be bold and optimistic. And as mentioned earlier, there's no time better than this time. That's just to start engaging right away. Actually, in our community, a lot of members are just a postdoc, PhD students, and even undergraduate students. So we're trying to bring everyone into this society. And second is be connected. So that is saying, like, we have to be local, connected to the local and international platforms. For example, we use WeChat, which is a very popular platform in China, and we also use Twitter and GitHub to post our events. And third one is be practical. So basically sharing some practical information and be clear about the open benefit of open science that is helpful for people to join at the very beginning. And the third one is be visible. So we got to be sure that our effort and our contributions and our events to be seen in the community so that people can join. And this increasing the visibility also help us to bring more collaborations and opportunities. And the next one is be affordable. So we are a grassroots network without fundings. So we dream big, but we also need to be realistic, and we do what we can do without overcommitting to make this community sustainable. And the last but not least is be local. We got to adapt to the local culture. That, for example, we use WeChat, which is the most accessible platform to people to join us. So this is the key to bring more people into this community. And as we mentioned, that to increase the diversity and the open science globally. This is what we propose, and this is also the ideas that we have started working on. The first is to build the open science platform for developing countries. And second is to automate translation of open science resource, use large language model as the technique we are using right now. And the third one is centralize the pre-registration and hackathon project that helps us for the reproducibility of the science. And we're very happy to be here, and we're eager and looking for the opportunity to bring all of this to the next level. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And our last speaker for this section is Hong Phuc Dang, who is the founder of FOSS Asia and also leads development of projects like Pocket Science Lab. One more navigation. All right.
Okay, so FOSS Asia stands for Free and Open Source Solutions. Many people asked me earlier. We started back in 2009. The whole idea is to foster the adoption and development of open source technologies in the region. What do we do to achieve this? So we run events. When we talk about different opportunities with open source, we collaborate with user communities across Asia to organize meetups. We run education program, coding contests, hackathons. And together with the community, we develop our own open source software and hardware. All the things that we do is completely available to the whole community, and we encourage contribution from people everywhere, not only from Asia. I believe that, you know, the principle of open source align very well with what we've been talking today about open science, being transparent, being open for people to freely contribute, freely distribute. And today I want to introduce to you a project of Force Asia. This is the Pocket Science Lab is an example of how open source offer a tool for scientific research and also enable the citizen scientists. A few years ago, why we started this project, a few years ago, there was one of our annual events, the Force Asia Summit. A physics teacher from India came to us with a problem that he cannot afford equipment to teach high school students in some village in India electronics and make it exciting for them. So the whole idea about teaching electronics, right? We think that this is a very important problem to solve because our world, entire world, make up of electronics. Whatever you see here on the table, computer, microphone, and everything. It's really important to enable the new generation of engineers. So therefore, we got this idea inspired to develop the Pocket Science Lab. In the beginning, basically, we did not have any funding. We did not try any research paper to start with. So we just have a network of people who cared about doing something good for education. We have software engineer, we have electronics engineer, we have a biologist, and some high school teacher in our community who want to take up on this project. So we developed this as a platform with multiple instruments, oscilloscope, multimeter, logic analyzer, weight generator, everything in one device. It's a very low cost device that enable different kinds of like conduct different kinds of experiment that normally people do not have opportunity to do if they rely on industrial instrumentation. So from the very start of the project, we try to open source. We try to make it open at all levels. Hardware, software, the schematic of the hardware, the documentation, everything open source. We try to lower the barriers for people who want to join into the electronics education. And the whole, this is also one example of self-sufficient local production, because you release everything open to the people. They can also produce it at their local fab lab. And we try to make it affordable as low as $42. You know why it's 42, right? The answer for the universe. And so some of the fields that we want to get into: environmental monitoring, physics, IoT. Beside all the instruments that I shared earlier, it's also possible to connect different sensors that work on the Arduino to the Pocket Science Lab. So over the years, we have learned a lot, and we also faced a lot of challenges. The first thing is many people of our community are engineers, and they do not focus a lot on documentation. And this is still remain the big challenge for us. Unlike software, when you make a wrong code, you can always rewrite and spend time on it. But something that happened to us just a few weeks ago, we have a new batch of Pocket Science Lab that produced, and it's come back that the manufacturer sold a wrong location for the LED of over 1,000 of BS lab. And of course, we do not have the funding to reproduce this again. So we have to manually solder ourselves. So where we get the funding to do all this, so people actually pre-order the device so that this is the problem of like chicken and egg issue. So they order and we produce. So doing hardware is much more difficult. Yes, so we, in order to bring the project to the next level, we are looking for funding to improve the hardware and put it into iOS. So we have it running on Android, on the laptop and everywhere, but not iOS. And because of this workshop, I just found out that there is a research on Pocket Science Lab done by the University of Santa Cruz here in the US, but I didn't know before. So I hope that we have more education partners who are willing to try our device and put it into research. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. This is great. So any questions for our coordination speakers? Yes. Let's start here.
Hi, thank you for everything. Was incredible. For the presentation of Knowledge Commons, and thank you for the presentation of the differentiation of humanities and social science, because we are not the same. We are especially attacked. There is in this moment everywhere, even if all science are social. I am working for a long time with another category that is knowledge mobilization, that is not knowledge commons, but knowledge mobilization, that is from the Canadians, but I'm working in Latin America with this category. And there is something, a part of everything that I wanted to say to all of you, a part of everything that I wanted to tell you and help us to don't permit to kill the Argentine science, please. Thank you very much.
Other questions?
Thanks. So this is a question, I think, for Malcolm and also a little bit for Ting. So you both talked about reproducibility. And as someone who used to make my living coding for science, I fully 100% appreciate that there are times when reproducibility is important. But I wonder if either of you deal with scenarios where actually reproducibility is not a critical part of the science, nor should it be. I say this as a qualitative researcher who will often run a survey or run a series of interviews, and I'm never going to get the same answer if I run a different series of interviews. But that doesn't mean my science isn't valid, just that it's not generalizable.
Yeah, well, when I started to get into this, I was astonished to see that there were papers on failure of reproducibility in experimental philosophy. I didn't even know experimental philosophy was a thing, but apparently it is. No, you're completely right. You know, if I do some research around the solar eclipse of 2023, that ain't going to be reproducible. But what I can do is try and use some of the more general lessons of our discussions around about reproducibility to describe what I did in sufficient detail to allow people to understand it, to judge the provenance of my findings, perhaps even if I pre-registered what I thought might happen before said solar eclipse and did that in a public format where someone could come and say, well, you're not just making stuff up because that's the shit that's what was observed, then that would be better. But sure, horses for courses, but let's try and use the techniques that we develop to, I'm interested in the provenance of a research claim, because in my space, I've seen far too many research claims of poor provenance get as far as 1,000 patient clinical trials before people realized they were testing a turkey.
Yeah, I think that the pre-registration research is one of the solution, that we don't do p-hacking after we have already got the result and we tell the story.
How many more questions do you want to take?
I mean, we're standing between folks and lunch, so maybe just a couple more.
Okay.
So I'm Daniel Ginsberg from the American Anthropological Association, which is why I was applauding for qualitative research. I had a similar question, but I was thinking of it in a slightly different way, and I wonder if you could reflect on it, because I was thinking about the question of coordination and how we do coordination in an interdisciplinary level, where we might have different means, appropriately so, of addressing the same values. I wouldn't tend to talk about citizen science in anthropology. I would definitely talk about community-based participatory action research. It's not the same, but there's a lot in common. And I think that they reach towards similar values of breaking down barriers between the researcher and the finger quotes, non-science community, drawing in outsiders. And I'm thinking about, if we want to talk about reproducibility, and yeah, you're not going to reproduce a solar eclipse, you're not going to reproduce an ethnography. I was saying to someone in the break, why don't you try being me last Tuesday and take field notes and see if your field notes are the same as mine? It's ridiculous. But I think that some of the principles might be the same. Some of the values might be the same, which I was having a hard time articulating. But your answer just now had me thinking about the idea of trust, where what can we do to be transparent as researchers in a way that other members of our research community, as well as members of the general public, can trust us. And so, yeah, I think, I guess I would just ask, what are the values that this kind of work is pointing towards? And how does that help us to work across disciplinary boundaries where we might run up against some differences of vocabulary that feel like obstacles more than they actually are?
I want to thank you for that question. And I think that this is exactly one of the issues that has kept disciplinary silos in place for far too long, that we feel like we're speaking different languages, or we're using the same words and we intend them differently. And we in fact have more in common when we are able to articulate the ways that we work to one another in more active ways. The story that I didn't tell in the lightning talk was why we changed our name from Humanities Commons to Knowledge Commons. It wasn't to erase the humanities. It was merely that we looked at our community and recognized that, in fact, the platform was being adopted by social scientists and bench scientists, particularly from outside the US, who were interested in being part of a community in which they could come together and articulate their values to one another in ways that were open and would lead to that ongoing dialogue. And so we began to recognize that real disciplinary inclusivity required us to change our name and become something a little bit different. So one of our goals is really to provide that space where we can think about the values first, articulate them to one another, have communities come together and be self-determining in the ways that they value their research practices, and then do that work in public with the community in ways that allow us to build trust through openness itself. Anyone else want to comment? Yeah,
Yeah, that's me. Thank you. So I'm Carolina Botero from Colombia. I have different hats, so I will spare you that. But then my question would be also probably, I can't remember your name, but for you, for the two ladies. So one of the things that happen in openness is intellectual property is a huge issue, and it's all by the idea that we are giving consent and that's it. But when you open platforms to everybody and with a very interesting way of addressing inclusivity as you're doing, there is again the issue of intellectual property, because especially for researchers, it is hard to say, I will only look into things that are open and exclude the closed, let's say. And when you go derivative, it goes increasingly that way. But okay, so you don't just rely on openness, but you also rely on exceptions and limitations. And exceptions and limitations are very different around the world, especially fair use is very different from copyright issues. And you get into a mess where there's a lot of restrictions and restraints. So I wonder how you're dealing with that and how it will get increasingly bad with the issues of data. And I am saying also that to you because you talk about translation, which is a big issue, and it will be increasingly true in the global south or in minority languages, as the first panel reminded us. So all of those things, I just kind of alert me, intellectual property, there's going to be problems there. So I just wonder how you're addressing those issues. Thank you.
Maybe I can. So, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, if I can talk a little bit about the translation first. So in China, a lot of people don't speak Chinese. Like my parents, they don't speak Mandarins. So they speak like a local dialect. So it is also challenging for us to bring more people that's non-English speakers. So that's why we started this Open Translate to just to bring all of those materials into Chinese so that we can actually start building the cultural from even younger generations. And for the first question, I don't really have the answer for that, but I think we can start it right now, as mentioned today. It just basically, we need to have this cultural build it, have the basic recognize, okay, we can need to do the open science. As for the data, for example, not have some agreement we have to do to make it open. For example, I work on the neuroimaging data. A lot of data cannot be shared because it's not defaced and it can be identified. And also a lot of like patient data, it's very sensitive to do that. At least when the paper got published or when we're doing research, we can meet that if someone come to me looking for the data and we have agreements to maintain the privacy of the data, we can share and then we can build this trust to move forward.
Okay, I think, Hong, did you want to say something?
So I'm not coming from a research background, and to be honest, a lot of terms that are being used here today, I'm also not so familiar with. But I can answer based on what I understand from the question. So the question about, I really appreciate the work that's been done in academic and also research, right? When we talk about open source, it's not only about the software or the hardware, it's actually the way how people produce the software is very interesting to learn from. The process, the open source working model. So you mentioned about how about intellectual property, how about like the different credited, but in the open source world, if you look at it, all the software, they have something called the open source licenses. There are 100 of different licenses where they define how you can use, how you can handle the software. And this is something that I think that from the research field, there's a lot that you can take a look and learn from the software movement, the technology, not the solution itself, but the process, how people produce something in the open source world. And I heard a lot today, like researchers, scientists, they need to get into tenure, they need to have their work published somewhere. But if you look in the technology side, yeah, so what is the feature person, the influencer in the technology side? So Linus Torvalds, so he becomes so famous. Everyone, the kernel is the most important technologies in the world. That he did not like, everything that he does is open source. So there's a lot of example that people being very successful, being worldwide recognizable by sharing their work. I think this is something could inspire more researchers to also get into that, to do more open science and make things available to the world. I don't believe in intellectual property, because what happened during COVID, a lot of people die just because some people want to patent their work. If we have everything open, people from elsewhere around the world can reproduce and can help to solve like big problems.
Thank you. I think we have to close the conversation there because folks are probably getting hungry, but I just encourage you to continue the conversation at lunch. And I just want to give one round of applause for all our speakers. Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much. All right. Yep.